and welcome everyone. I'm Julia Thayne DeMordaunt, and today I will be the moderator for this panel on international mobility. The International Mobility Panel is part of the Hub Institute's Sustainability Summit. The Hub Institute was founded 9 years ago with its current focus on challenges to sustainability faced around the world. The Institute has 55,000 decision makers in France and globally as part of its followers. And I wanted to say especially a big thank you to Vincent Ducret and his staff of 30 experts and analysts in Paris who helped us put together this panel today. Today, we're going to hear about the tale of 3 cities. So Los Angeles, represented myself, London, represented by Rikesh, and Miami, represented by Carlos. These 3 cities, in my very humble opinion, are leading the world in innovating transportation, but for 3 very different reasons. First up is my town, Los Angeles. For economic and environmental reasons, LA is determined to become the new epicenter for zero emissions mobility, both for people movement and for goods movement. I'll be representing LA because I'm formerly the Executive Officer of Economic Development for Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti's office. Currently, I'm Principal of Urban Transformation at Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a global nonprofit focused on advising cities around the world on climate action. And I'm also a board member of Urban Movement Labs, which is a nonprofit right here in LA that's driving mobility transformation. Next up is going to be London. London is all about innovating public transit. Because of the pandemic and because of drop-offs in ridership, Transport for London, the transit agency that directs the streets and transit of London, is now rethinking what public transit means. We're joined today by one of the leaders of that transformation, Rikesh Shah. Rikesh is the head of commercial innovation. He worked on the pandemic response and on the Olympics. He's on the board of Smart London and of the Transport Museum, which is very cool. So welcome, Rikesh, to the panel. And last but not least is Miami. Miami has been facing changes wrought by climate differences for a while now. But for that reason, it's also innovating around resilience. And it's innovating around resilience, not just on the ground, but really rethinking travel by land, sea, and air. So I'm very delighted to be joined by Carlos Cruz-Casas, who's Assistant Director over Strategic Planning for Miami-Dade County's Department of Transportation and Public Works. And Carlos is one of those rare human beings who's both an urban planner and an engineer, which means that he gets to understand how to design and implement livable cities from a multitude of facets. So welcome, Carlos. With those introductions, we're going to dive right into the questions. I may take moderator's prerogative and answer a few of those questions myself, but I wanted to start out by asking Carlos. Carlos, kind of give us, what's the mobility forecast? What's the weather forecast in Miami for what are some of the big challenges that you're facing right now, mobility-wise?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about forecasts these days, right? And there's a lot going on up in the air and everywhere, but thank you very much for having me here and be participating in this conversation. But let's get to it, right? Right now, what we're seeing is an increased level of movement, right? But it doesn't happen, it doesn't follow any specific pattern. We have new residents, a lot of people are moving into Miami. We have new jobs, people changing jobs. Julia, you know about that too. We have working from home, working from a different home, and an increased number of deliveries. So right now, there's a lot of dynamic needs that our community, our transportation industry was not used to. As you mentioned, I have a background in transportation engineering, urban transportation planning, and everything that we learn is basically out the window. All these things about commuting patterns are changing. So one of the things, of course, we're looking into is how do we build a transit network that can actually provide services for all that can provide mobility. And the way that we're doing it is by introducing what we call the Better Bus Network, which is actually providing frequent, consistent headway all day, every day of the week. It doesn't matter that work 8 to 5 or work in the service industry or just out for a dinner, you're going to have frequent service throughout the day. At the same time, we're introducing on-demand transit because that particular component about people going the same direction at the same time is changing. So on-demand transit service is something that can really provide for the dynamic changes of our community. And of course, you see bike and scooters and all the other things that are coming around, even segways, that are happening here in Miami. pandemic, a lot of innovation is happening. But let me tell you something, probably the biggest problem that we have in terms of mobility and the forecast that we need to start addressing is the infrastructure. We're asking people to take different mode of transportation, to walk to the bus stop, to walk to their job, or take a bike trip to somewhere. And right now, our infrastructure is not there. So I think it's something that we need to make sure that we innovate with solutions, but at the same time, we innovate by introducing the right infrastructure to allow people to be, whether it's in 4 wheels, in 2 wheels, or your own 2 foot, it doesn't matter. We need to treat everyone with the same level of respect, and we need to make sure that we provide that up front. So there's a couple of things we're working on that I would love to expand later on.
Amazing. Carlos, so interesting that you're talking about what we're calling the Great Resignation, right? I don't know if it's happening in Europe, but in the US, we're seeing a lot of people resign from their jobs. And because our transportation networks are designed for commuting, we're finding this mismatch between the existing transportation network and what we're seeing from people right now. Rikesh, would love to hear from you. What's happening in London? What are the challenges there?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And it's similar to what Carlos has said, and just building on some of his points. The immediate priority is the recovery from the pandemic and making sure that we've seen a sustained increase in ridership both on the bus and tube network, which is a good sign. And the role of transport in any city is critical in terms of making sure businesses can operate, people can get to schools, people get to jobs. So I think that's our number one priority, is to help the recovery. And as part of that, there's an opportunity here to think about sustainability and how can we encourage people to walk more, to cycle more, as part of our goal to encourage 80% of trips in London to be made by walking, cycling and public transit by 2041. So we've spent quite a lot of effort in repurposing some of our infrastructure, in particular turning more walkways from the private road, and also to encourage more cycling lanes as well. So that's a focus. I think the other big focus is we should not forget the emphasis on road safety. Tragically, in 2019, we had 125 deaths on London's road network, and we had 90 in 2020. So we have to get to zero, which means we cannot take our eyes off that focus on Vision Zero. Air quality and the impact of freight is something Carlos touched on. That's also front of mind. And I think the other one is we have to continuously deliver what customers want. So in London, every journey matters. They want to get from A to B safely, securely, reliably. They want value for money, and they want progress and innovation. So we've got to continuously focus on what Londoners and what visitors to Londoners want as part of our transport offering.
I've always thought it was fascinating, Rikesh, and thank you for that answer, that Transport for London is a business, that it's about public good, but it's also about trying to meet customers' needs. And so I think it's given, sort of a unique perspective on how to design transit, especially in the 21st century, especially for the wide diversity of people in London and for that matter anywhere. So I'd love to just dive into that question a bit more and start with you, Rikesh. I'd love to hear about an innovation that your city is trialing. Why is that innovation game changing? And why is it game changing, especially in the context of climate change?
A couple of examples, but the one that's front of mind is the e-scooter trial that we're currently running in London. So with the pandemic, it was really important that we provided as many sustainable forms of and safe forms of transport in terms of people moving around the city. So private scooters are e-scooters are illegal in London and in the UK, but the government has provided dispensation to run trials. So as a result, we recently procured or brought through an open competition 3 providers. And part of this is, rather than just saying yes to e-scooters or saying no, we want to run a controlled trial, and that trial is underpinned by safety. And as a result, we are currently working with various London boroughs to see what impact e-scooters could have in London, not just now, but in the future, to inform future policy and legislation. So that's a really interesting piece of work. And the other one, which we've worked with yourself in LA on, Julia, is the Freight Lab program. And as a result of the increase in freight trips across cities, accelerated by the pandemic, how can we work together with innovators to reduce the adverse impact of freight around reducing congestion, road safety risk, and pollution? So we've seen a series of very innovative products that have come through, which we're trialing over the next 12 months in the city. So 2 very different examples, but very relevant in the innovation and hopefully thinking about the future of the city.
No, both excellent examples, especially the second one, the Freight Lab example, Rikesh, just brings to mind, some of the things that we're trialing in LA, from light duty to medium duty to heavy duty zero emissions trucks. I think it's been interesting to see how the goods movement industry has really accelerated their use of zero emissions technology, but how much more zero emissions technology needs to improve in order to carry those heavy loads. And also to your point, Carlos, about infrastructure, to make sure that our infrastructure is up to the task of being able to have those heavier loads on roads or, wherever they are. So Carlos, would love to hear from you in terms of Miami, what are you all trialing? What are you really excited about? And why is it so game changing?
Yeah. So first, let me just kind of start a little bit. I know my intro was a little bit of a long when you mentioned Carlos Cruz-Casas, Assistant Director of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, overseeing transportation strategy planning. Long and perhaps doesn't justice what that means or what we do. I like to consider ourselves a mobility management agency. We do have traffic engineering, traffic signals and sign, bicycle and pedestrian, highway engineering, bridges, transit planning, transit operations, and the for hire transportation like taxis and limos, and even before the state pre-enters Uber and Lyft. So basically everything that moves Miami-Dade County, right? So that's why my examples will be a little bit more intertwined between cars and transit and other things that are happening. And not to take anything away, of course, from LA. I think LA has been a champion in terms of mobility innovation and starting on how to deliver policies, right? When you guys created the mobility data specifications to make sure that we allow for innovation in our streets and we make sure that government innovates in the way we deliver policies to the private users, it is phenomenal and basically sparking a lot of these ideas throughout. From our point of view, we have a couple things going on. As you can imagine, Miami-Dade County is very big and very large and have a lot of things going on. But, I'm really thrilled about the Go Connect program, which is on-demand transit that introduces basically a trip planning component with transit fixed route to make sure that we don't double dip into the services out there, but we allow the customer to pick where they need to go, and we tell them this is the best route, either on-demand service or fixed route service. That's really easy things that are happening around, but it's really phenomenal to start thinking of how we maximize the resources that we have. And along that, we have introduced a community liaison program. We want to make sure that we plan for the community and with the community. And we have introduced a way for us to hire people from the community to be participant in the conversation and get the feedback, because there's the difference between a on-demand transit today and an autonomous shuttle or vehicles in the future is you saying hello and goodbye to the driver. Everything else from the experience of the user is the same. So we want to make sure that we understand that early on so we can inform our partners and everyone out there about, this is what their communities are looking into. From a signals point of view, this one, it has me really ecstatic, right? We have about 3,000 traffic signals throughout Miami-Dade County. We're converting them to a latest, computer system. It's called 2070LX, allowing for two-way communication with vehicles, but at the same time allowing for adaptive signal control, which is a more, advanced way for us to do traffic signals. But that is, innovative in itself. But the most innovative thing that we're implementing is we're testing how we can use mobile devices to give bicycle riders the same level of respect when going through a signal. So that way a bicycle rider can actually be detected and given priority at traffic signals the same way they would do for transit, the same way we do for other vehicles, right? That to me is something that we'd love to explore more, because it touches on priority, it touches on safety, and it touches for us to make sure that we're not giving more value to someone in four wheels than in two wheels. And one of the things that we're also adding into our mix of innovation stuff that we have is a partnership with Commotion Miami and the creation of the Commotion Lab, or C Lab Miami. In that particular effort, we have two task forces that are really interesting to me. One of them is curb management and smart infrastructure, and the other one is urban air mobility. On the first one, I think the game changing is not necessarily about curb management and the way that we're addressing that. The game changing is that we're taking a step back and we're saying there's a lot of pressure on our streets. We want to put more bike lanes. We want to put more scooter lanes. We call them micromobility lanes. We have a lot of these delivery services out there. We have a lot of competing uses for the curb. So if we want to do more of that, how can we maximize and basically manage the system better. And right now we have this pilot project that we're working with the Go Connect. It's a partnership that we have with VIA, in the sense that we're going to use the mobility data specification to deliver to the VIA driver whether or not that curb space is used, or that the road is blocked because of another access, and they need to figure out a better way to drop or pick up the user, right? So it's really putting into implementation about curb management with transit to maximize the use of the space. And the other one is on the urban air mobility, is really trying to understand what's the role of the public sector in this environment. Like I mentioned, who controls the air space is up in the air at this point, but we control the space down on the ground. We want to make sure there's a lot of oversights on how we can maximize the use of the air mobility, but at the same time to make it work, because ultimately in an area like Miami-Dade County, where you have the bay, we have rivers, we have lakes, it's really important for us to be able to fly above that and get where we need to go.
Very interesting, Carlos. And I love how you talk about your role in the agency that you're in as being a mobility management agency. I think that, plus the idea of having community liaisons, gets to the point about innovation being both product and process, and especially in government, that being really important to have both. So on that point of innovation, Rikesh, would love to hear from you. Just now that you've been with TfL for a while, now that you're head of commercial innovation, what is innovation anyways? What does that really mean in the context of transport in cities, and especially in your role now?
Yeah, and I think it's been an interesting definition internally, because what innovation isn't is the perception that some people might have, which is this one of beanbags, pool table, and just constantly creating new products, and you're bringing them back to the head office, and then you go back again, because we're not inventors necessarily. It's about making life better for Londoners, and how do we start thinking about the future of London, and how do we get London ready for the future. So there's, building on, I think, Carlos's really good description earlier, there's probably two high-level hypotheses here. One is new mobility, and with and both of these focus on emerging tech. With advances in technology, we're seeing new forms of transport. And as a result of the new forms of transport, we're getting market innovators approaching us all the time to say, can we do this in London, because it will be really good for London? And the instinctive thing could be to say yes, or it could be to say no. And I think both isn't the right answer. And by that, I mean by being instinctive. I think what you have to do is you have to understand what it is, and then as a result, run some trials. And through the trials, really look at it through the lens of what we're trying to achieve strategically as a city. And so, is it safe? What does it mean for air quality? What does it mean for accessibility? What does it mean for equity, etc., etc.? And then I think the only way you can then make a policy decision is by creating that evidence and using that evidence to inform what it means for the city. So I think we're doing the same with e-scooters. We've done similar things with demand responsive transit. And I think we should do the same for any form of new transport that comes in. The second part is, how do you do things better, cheaper, and quicker based on the advances in technology? So that could be the use of AI, it could be the use of blockchain, it could be the use of robotics, and lots of other innovative solutions that we're seeing out there. And again, I think we should approach it the same way. Define the problem that you're trying to solve. Don't get too obsessed with the technology, and spend enough time on that problem, because the risk is sometimes in city authorities, someone suggests the problems and we all run after it. And then a few years we realize we started with the wrong problem statement. Spend enough time on creating the data points of defining the problem statement, then go out there and see what's in the market to address that problem statement. And again, run some trials, create the evidence, and then develop a business case. And based on the business case, start thinking about how you scale it. Because quite often where public bodies and other corporates have failed is you have a lovely proof of concept and you've got a business case, but then you can't scale it. So how do we start thinking about the scaling? And that requires culture change, it's business process change, and it's also about bringing those innovators in from a procurement point of view, because as public bodies, we have to be open and transparent. So I think there's lots of considerations there, but in my head, it's by doing those things, how can you create value for the city, both in the short, medium, and long term?
Well, I'm very glad that I decided to not be in the room where I had hacky sacks and billiard tables when we were doing this panel, so that people would consider us serious people. But no, I think you make some excellent points, Rikesh, and I actually want to ask the same question to you, Carlos, with a little bit of a twist. But some of the points you make really about being strategic and about not just taking the first innovator that comes at you or the first invention that comes at you, but stepping back and looking at the field and understanding what could be the benefit. I think that's one of the reasons why we started Urban Movement Labs, this public-private partnership in LA that really thinks strategically about innovation and can work in that third space between public, private, and communities. And that's actually the pivot that I wanted to make to you, Carlos. I'd love to hear about, how has your lens of innovation and how you deal with innovators changed, in part because of the launch of C-Lab Miami?
I think first that was an excellent answer, Rikesh. I love the fact that we all agree that innovation is not necessarily a parade of shiny objects, but is how we address the problem that we have in hand, right? And it starts with processes, right? And to your point, Julia, when we launched and we announced C-Lab Miami, it gave us structure. Right, like as you can imagine, there's a lot of, with all the different use cases that we have in Miami-Dade County, we have a city of cities, like I call it. We have 34 municipalities within the county, and we're very spread out. And I'll tell you this, other than snow and slopes, I think we have it all, right? We have from heavy dens, from beach areas, from rivers, from even farms, right? It's someone making wines in the flatlands of Florida, but I don't know about that. But beyond that, it is the fact that we have a lot of people coming to us with solutions, right? It's like, I have the key, I'm just looking for the lock. It doesn't work that way, right? We need to figure out a better way to address this. And I think what happened is, it's the worst thing that can happen. You have people from around the world coming to us and say, this is a solution that you have for you. And I'm like, I love it. And the next one is, I fell in love with it too. And then the worst thing that can happen, it was the next thing that I said is, I just don't need it right now. Right, and I put that as a failure, not about innovators, not a failure about technology, but a failure of us not being able to voice our needs and concerns and immediately and out loud. So what we're trying to do now is exactly what Rikesh mentioned, which is let's work on that challenge statement first. Let's take a step back and let's hone down on what is exactly the issue that we have that we need to address at the moment. And then let's be loud about it. And I can be loud on my own, but having C-Lab and having the collaboration with you guys, with Urban Movement Lab and City Tech and TFL, it really helps for us to augment that and making sure that we then draw attention to the things that need fixing right now. There's other things that are happening. I'm glad there's a lot of things that are happening, and it's okay. People want to try things in our community, by all means. If it's safe and it's something that works for us, we'll do it. But we also need to start addressing the things that we have and the needs that we have. So I think that was the biggest kind of transformation, because again, I was pulled in so many different directions. Check this out, try this, look at that. And I'm like, wait, this is just too hard right now for us to focus on all these million things. Let's try to tackle this right now, and then we can build on top of that.
Very interesting. No, I love that answer, love that approach. So this is going to be our final question. It's one of my favorite questions because it's about borrowing a transport innovation. So if you could borrow a transport innovation from one of the other cities represented on this panel, what would it be and why? Carlos, going to start with you first.
Oh, you put me on the spot right now. There's a lot of great things, and I keep a lot of close tabs of what LA and London are doing. Given that there's a lot of focus on the urban areas, I'm gonna sparse out a little bit of outside of the urban area, and I say I really want to grab the blue card system from LA and bring it down to Miami. We focus on transit and fixed route and demand response and all that. All that works great when you have a decent amount of density, but there's areas that you're not going to have the density, and there's still the need for people to get to where they need to go and do the groceries, and it's hard to carry groceries with a kid and a scooter, right? So what we'll be able to do is to provide a cart light approach towards Miami-Dade County, and again, understanding that the enemy of this story is not the car, is the use that we give to it. And if we can find electric car share programs that can be introduce Miami-Dade County throughout and allow for people to live car-free, and whenever they need it, just to rent it for an hour or two, to me is the way to go. And it can continue to promote, again, better mobility throughout Miami-Dade County, accessibility and access to transportation for some areas that are more lower income, and at the same time start addressing this thing about, introducing electrification so we can start reducing our footprint here.
Excellent. Thanks, Carlos. All right, Rikesh.
Yeah, if I can be greedy, Julia, I'll pick one each. So I think from LA, it's the work that you're doing around the delivery zones and nudging behavior that you've got to be environmentally friendly, and then you can get a parking spot to load and unload. And I think that's a brilliant way of working with the private sector who also want to do the same in terms of zero carbon. And by nudging that behavior, I think it's a great idea. And I can imagine with all the different regions that you have within LA, to get that buy-in across the region would have been difficult. So that would be a great one. And I think on the Miami side, Carlos, I was reading about the stuff that you're doing with Forward and the outreach in terms of community engagement. And I think it's fantastic how you've got a private sector entity to really engage with citizens and asking them what do they want. And I think it's a great degree of trust and collaboration where, the way you're engaging with the citizens. So there'll be two examples for me.
Okay, Rikesh, I'll grant you those two because they were two good examples. I think, sort of on that same line of thinking, I would also like to pull two examples, one from London and one from Miami. And the one from Miami would be Carlos. I would just love to bring the innovative brain of Carlos to Los Angeles, but also the idea of a mobility management agency and this integrated approach to all of the different modes of transportation and surfaces and ocean, et cetera. Because one of the things that we lack sometimes in LA is this integrated, cohesive, coherent approach across all of those different things. And then from London, I have always been really jealous of the bike path along the canal. We have 52 miles of along the LA River, which is right now non-contiguous bike path. And so to be able to bring that together would just be game changing for the city. And I think similarly to what it has done for London. So with that said, and of course, Rikesh, I want to bring Rikesh too. Everybody's going to come to LA so we can get all these great minds here. But beyond that, I just wanted to say, again, a huge thank you to you both, Carlos and Rikesh, representing Miami and London, and then me for Los Angeles, to the Hubs Institute, to Vincent, and to the Sustainability Summit for bringing us all together for this excellent panel on international mobility. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for tuning in.